Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or, hey, filled with sponsored bullcrap. Today we're taking a look at Uncharted Lost Legacy, the Uncharted 4 DLC that was not was. Additionally, I want to say thanks to Sony for supplying the game code more than a week in advance. That is always nice to have that amount of time. And of course, as everybody knows by now, nothing's taken for free at ACG. That means, as always, with any codes given to me, I buy a game or a code right away and give it away to patrons. So my hard-earned money is pretty much on the line just like yours. Let's see how Uncharted Lost Legacy fares in the globe-hopping homicidal adventure hoedown that we all expect. Does it succeed despite the lack of the Nathans and the Sullys, or is it like Indiana Jones would be if Tom Selleck had got the role? Just friggin' terrible. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Uncharted Lost Legacy. Uncharted 4, but bigger, ancient hydraulics that stand the test of time, and the excellence of elephant pimp rings. Graphics are up first. I don't think anybody can argue Uncharted's never really been a slouch, and in fact, to many, the series titles have always been the pinnacle of graphical presentation on whatever PlayStation system that they were released on, and in many places, Lost Legacy continues that, but for me, it was in some rather different places than I expected. You know, I've always found the color work in the Uncharted games to be really top-notch, but the theme and overall tone set in Lost Legacy with colors is stupendous, and it's impossible not to be impressed walking into an ancient, deadly, axe-swinging statue room and seeing the soft beams of light coming in through a ruined roof, and seeing the overlaying use of color and tone and depth to make each place feel unique, despite it being a wall you crash through or a grass-heavy plain. While the autumn-like location in Uncharted 4 really dazzled me with its differences to the main, Legacy's is a more subtle approach, but due to the length of the title and its less transatlantic-like attitude, it actually seemed a bit more noticeable, and I like that. And now that Nathan's been draked and is out opening a restaurant or some crap, it's left to Chloe and Nadine, introduced in Uncharted 2 and 4, I think, respectively, to shoot, stab, steal, bash, beat, leap, lunge, and one-liner their way through the ever-crumbling environments of fantastic former empires. And I gotta admit, they really look good doing it. It's known that because they fight differently than Nathan, they have to have their own animations mixed in, and the overall presentation and fighting style is really unique. And the first time you have them both taking out enemies in a tag team with kicks, punches, throws, and hard part of one body hitting the soft, fleshy part of another, it's a stop and look in awe moment. And of course, we have seen this in other games, and while it worked somewhat, here it just seems to flow incredibly well with you moving between combatants and doing your best Jackie Chan before he exploded his ankle martial arts combos. And I do get it, the animation in the Uncharted games have always told an excellent sort of adventure is not restricted to badass status at all times. They're all capable of being hurt, tripping, losing footing, and just frankly skating by on luck most of the time. Here though, up close, it feels elevated. And the world itself, of course, is no slouch either, and this area called Gats is just epically large for an Uncharted game, with you tag team jumping into your Jeep and able to take out various temples that make up a large part of the adventure, being able to be done in any order. Now that means exploring this massive area to find secrets spread around, and even a large section of mystery puzzles that, to me, felt more Uncharted than maybe Uncharted has felt in years, and that's because it really didn't tell you what's going on. But unfortunately, not all is perfect. First, this game has some odd bugs even with their updated patch, like the teleporting of Nadine. Now, frankly, it's creepy with her teleporting to locations sometimes versus actually traversing the landscape, which we've seen before. The patch did seem to rectify this a little bit, but it still happened a couple times. Also, there's a large number of low detail textures throughout the game, and unlike past Uncharted's, a couple of them are in your face with various elements inside, let's say, exploding train cars to parts inside of tombs, and sometimes it can make some of those spots look a little undone. Of course, once again, the game, though, is rock solid performance-wise, and I've always been a bit shocked at the black magic that these guys can put into the game and still get a solid frame rate showing all this on screen. And on the PS4 Pro, it's actually still just as rock solid, but that resolution is cranked up to be what looks like dynamic 4K, and of course there's HDR on both of those systems if you have the ability to display it. Overall, I'd just say, as always, the Uncharted series really is a good-looking game. Lost Legacy continues that, and while it still has the magical rope of ignoring gravity plus one kind of oddities, it just continues to be a great romp graphically. Sound, music, and voice.
Over here! Take them out!
Right, back to shotgun. I'm perfectly capable of driving, you know.
I'm sure you are, honey. I just prefer to.
And you know what? Let's do sound first. Uncharted, for the most part, has always excelled here with an ear placed firmly in the camp of, I think, two distinct goals: immersion of the environment into the player's information and augmenting what can be augmented to offer more blockbuster-style presentation. And they nailed it here. I don't think that's unexpected. From occlusion to reflection to obstruction, sounds rebound around you in the caves, and the long crack of rifles are heard a moment after your face is a smashed tomato can. It's always important that a game really feeds back to the gamer, the environment, and it really mimics what we saw in Uncharted 4 with some excellent sound work. And also effect sounds, explosions, guns, and that time you decide to Marty Jannetty and Heartbreak Kid someone's life away, it sounds really nice and crunchy up close. It is, of course, Uncharted, though, which means sometimes, depending on what's up, particular layers are enhanced because this is the coolest bell ever. And it can be very surprising at times when something just friggin' gets turned up to 11 by the different sound options. It works, it's action movie style, but it may not be for everybody, and there were a couple times where even I was a little bit surprised by it. Luckily, as always, these guys have put options into the audio systems to allow you to choose more discrete adjustments, and that's always appreciated. Voice. First, I gotta say this, Claudia Black and Laura Bailey do a wonderful job as Chloe and Nadine and keeping the spirit of their characters from the earlier titles and then moving them forward here. And the camaraderie works well across the background of escaping enemies' bullets just to get caught again to escape enemies' bullets again. The odd thing here, though, is where the mystical and the past were always discussed by Drake in a way that made you know it was a childlike fascination, but also one firmly planted in the knowledge that most of the time it was myths. At times, much of the dialogue in Lost Legacy lands flat and results in times when you think, they do know this god who chopped this other god's tusk off and sold it for the most excellent noodle soup ever didn't actually do that, right? It's odd, and it switches between that and the feeling of tenseness and realism a couple times through the game. Now, this is most evident later on when a clue's discovered a bit later in the title, and it's during a puzzle sequence, and Chloe's reaction isn't really wrapped up in being one step closer to the treasure, but more in beat with, hey, I bet those gods had amazing parties. Now, you could say some of it's due to the knowledge of the connection between all of this stuff and her family, which is a main crux of the story, but these moments really have nothing to do with that, and even in a way, narratively exclude them. Luckily, this is far less often than all the one-offs, barbs, backstab mentions, and overall strangely caustic relationship that the two have, and they do a really good job overall with delivering everything from cheesy one-liners to a possibly but not really but maybe goodbye with mutual respect. And I have to say, bravo to the writers for one particular moment where their natural differences as characters comes up regardless of that shallow veneer of attempted cooperation they've sort of polished the first parts of the game with. It's really well done, and the way it occurs, circles back, and then occurs again, but with understanding having been reached, is really impressive. Voices for everyone else are pretty good, with the main boss an enemy amalgamation of every 1980s movie bad guy able to take on legions of people hand to hand until he suddenly magically isn't, to some other characters that have bit moments or come into the game only to be shuttled off on the end of one of the duo's rifles. Sure, it hits some speed bumps, that goes without saying, but the presentation here is really solid and does what I think it's supposed to. It makes you interested in these new characters. Music. You know, I've always been pretty impressed by their scores in the Uncharted series, and sure, at times they can get a bit, hey, listen to us kind of feel to them. Lost Legacy feels like an excellent middle ground, though, and it's a bit different, leaving vast parts of exploration open to either ambient tracks or nothing at all, so that the sound of the wind, rain, or far-off rivers can sort of filter up to you to give you locational clues, especially because, of course, that map that you have can't be plotted, so you have to continually reference different bits of the landscape. But when you end up in the midst of a 30-to-1 battle royale with a grassy field as your ring, the battle music just sort of swells up, and it's this mixture of instrument choice as well as the pace and tempo that I absolutely love. And the assorted violin chirps as bullets fly by, or the tribal-like sounding percussion fit incredibly well overall with the title. Nothing feels specific to one particular area. There's really not much else to say. There's a fine control on the soundtrack, and I feel that you can see some growth here. And even though I really like the soundtracks prior, I think this is one of my favorites overall when it's experienced within the game world. And speaking of game worlds, let's talk about gameplay and a bit about the story. Now, Lost Legacy follows about 6 months after Uncharted 4 and finds Chloe up to the usual shenanigans in the Western Ghats during a civil war, searching for an ancient treasure while being followed, harassed, and generally kicked the crap out of by a warlord, and finds herself forming a strange alliance with Nadine from Uncharted 4, and for better or worse, they're flung together like a female version of Army of Two. From that point on, it's pure Uncharted, which means one second you're taking a leap of faith across a chasm, hoping your finger bones won't explode like the world's scenery does, and then the next, you're leaping in a Jeep to commandeer it and racing full speed against an enemy-filled train. But it's not just the battle moments. It's Uncharted having always excelled at offering the almost childlike dream of exploration, of questionably mysterious, possibly magical artifacts laying around the world like a friggin' massive game of Operation where instead of a buzzer going off if you screw up, enemies flood the level and try to kill you. It's Indiana Jones, filtered through the youth of a Goonies filter, and at times Legacy hits that. Like when Chloe and Nadine first jump in a Jeep and you start ripping across the game world and you realize, oh crap, I can sort of do whatever I want at whatever pace I want. And those are interspersed moments of solitude that are broken by the sheer anarchy of accidentally alerting a hornet's nest of enemies at an impromptu way station. That's when Legacy, at least to me, is hitting on all cylinders, an exemplary example of side content for a title offering more legs to the fictional world that you already liked anyway. And it's hard not to like the protagonists because, I mean, they're antique roadshow disasters. I swear to God, the moment these people enter a tomb, everyone nearby must groan and be like, well, it was nice to have a bit of history while it lasted before the characters somersault leap and smash through half of it like they have some kind of hatred towards pottery. And while performing a number of the puzzles in Legacy, the way it's done and the teamwork really seem to hit the mark. I like these characters and the way they work together, even if you find yourself at the wrong end of a statue's strangely well-lubed axe swing. But to me, where Uncharted Lost Legacy stumbles is when it tries to do things just a little too different. Now, there's some stuff I can't talk about due to it actually being embargoed, but there's some events that happen later on, some encounters. I really didn't like how they didn't make much sense to what was occurring right before I engaged in them, and that sort of bothered me. But overall, it just happened a couple times. Now, this game also introduces some stuff to multiplayer. First, it's going to come with everything Uncharted 4 has, but if you like that, then you'll probably like that they've also added a survival arena mode to this game. So you're talking about 12 plus maps, a half dozen game modes, a ton of unlockables, as well as this new mode, which actually includes waves as well as warlord bosses, so that's very cool. Now, when it comes to length, you're looking about 8 to 12 hours depending on difficulty, and if you go for a good number of secret items or explore the various enemy encampments in the open area, that spot alone could add hours. So if you decide to explore them, it's going to go way up. And of course, that brings us to fun factor. Lost Legacy is at its best when you're the Jerome Bettis of adventurers, rumbling, stumbling, bumbling into success. And when Lost Legacy hits that perfect spot, it's wonderful. Even if every time Chloe leaps around the game world, you know the ledge is going to break, so much so that it became a joke as I continue to play it. While gunplay has never really been the absolute pinnacle of Uncharted's presentation, it's also handled well and it's pretty fun. And though this is a truncated overall affair, swinging behind an enemy, using your grappling gun and taking them out with your silenced pistol is not going to get old quick. But I do believe that the game suffered a little bit from the odd development that's been talked about, from being DLC to being possibly Nathan Drake to being his kid, something with Sully in it, Sam, and then going to Nadine and Chloe, and then exploding from there into this 10 plus hour title with full multiplayer. And I think that's caused a few speed bumps. As I said, I felt the overall story was sort of stop and start, and it seems remarkably haloed, meaning that you sort of need an extra book to carry along and read with you and the excerpts, because otherwise some of these emotional moments don't really seem to matter that much. I also think the game absolutely suffers for not being able to at least be Nadine a small amount. You're left with a character that tries her best to tell you why she's traveling with you, but most of the time you're like, whatever. And her hatred for groups or people are short-shifted to the point of basically someone saying, dude, over there, that's a bad guy. And then Nadine looking off into the distance saying, I knew that group once, and then shooting that person in the head. I think it's very fun, even if it does hit some roadblocks. And the inclusion of all that content in the survival mode means that it also has a hefty amount of content. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. This is a buy, especially at this reduced price of $39.99. I think that's a pretty perfect price, in all honesty. It has a couple issues. It's still head and shoulders above a lot of games when it comes to presentation and atmosphere, from the sweeping I was just there vistas to various gun battles that you're in at any different time. It's a testament, honestly, to these guys' ability when a game comes along that is not only a side-style title, but has its share of issues and is still this incredibly well made. So that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Maybe check out Twitter or Patreon. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Once again, thanks for Sony for providing the code. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.